you are, bro. Straight in the video camera. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another day of life in a crazy, crazy world. Daylight savings time makes me feel insane. So, hey, everybody, I did a podcast yesterday called The Revolution. And it wasn't this one. It's another revolution. It was really cool. I put a link up on over at my Instagram, also my Facebook. Hello, Linda and Chuck. Good morning. So it was really good. I was really excited about it, the interview, and I think it's about an hour and a half. We touch a lot of bases of everything that's kind of going on in the world, and I think it was good. So if so I figured today we would try to jump back into Galatians a little bit because we did, I think we did 3 parts, and we only got to Galatians. We finished Galatians 2, but we stopped like in January 19th, and so I figure, well, I'm going to do a little recap today. Today we'll do previously on for the folks, for all of us to catch back up on Galatians, and then we'll hopefully do something fresh next week. But it's always good to take. I mean, I always get something different out of Galatians. I did have somebody say something really interesting to me, though, as I was like, hey, we're going Galatians, but the world kind of went upside down, so we kind of got off of it and had to focus on some other things. And they said that seemed very Galatians of me, because Galatians is, kind of dealing with the conflict in a community, and our community has become kind of global now, and we're kind of dealing and talking about that kind of conflict. So hopefully my mic was picking all this up. I tried to put it over on the side so my sweet Public Enemy necklace didn't rub on it. This was a pin that the back broke off, and so I put a hole in it and made it into a Public Enemy necklace. So there you go. And if you listen to that podcast I did yesterday, it was at 9 a.m., so I was tired. I'm tired now because of the stupid time change. I don't know why it messes with me so much. But you'll hear me talk about Public Enemy and what I was like as a kid. So anyhow, check that out if you want to hear what I thought about Satanic Panic in the 80s and what I think about everything up until now, which most of you probably know. So I just wanted to kind of catch us up on Galatians, see if we can get there. Who knows what's going to happen? The world is mad. Our leaders are acting nuts. A lot of injustice is happening places, and we gotta work on that. We gotta focus on that. But Galatians, I think, keeps us still in the right mindset, and is there always been a reason why it's my favorite book in the Bible, and why we do it at the beginning of every year. Well, one is so I don't keep teaching out of it all year long, and 2 is I think it's highly relevant for the story we find ourselves in the world. And also in the faith communities, and in Christianity in general is so divided and so ridiculous, right? So here we are. So yeah, I know. I have a tendency. Someone wrote "nuts" as an understatement. I have a tendency, maybe, not to try to downplay things. I try to take a sobering look, but I also try to, Cornel West said that he's like, I'm a pessimist, but at the same time, I'm a prisoner of hope. And that's me. I'm kind of that prisoner of hope. So that that ball and chain with the word hope written on it, kind of carry around with me. Um, you know, try to tries to keep me from completely thinking the sky is falling, and that we can actually make a difference. And maybe this is the big, what's going on right now is the big. Did you ever read the comic The Watchmen? Maybe it's the big monster squid that's going to bring us all together. If you've read The Watchmen, you know that's a complicated uh, analog. All right, so what do we got going on? We got Galatians. We've gone through it. You can go back and listen to it and get caught up with all. I'm sure I put the times. Last year we spent 16 weeks in Galatians, and it is not a long book in the Bible, but we really went through all the scholarship of that. So I feel like there's layers there. Maybe one day I'll collect all those talks together and put them in a book or something, and we have like a kind of like the official Galatians study book. Maybe we can get like a scholar to look over it as well to make sure, take all the bullshit I made up. Oh yeah, The Watchman was just brought up. I'm getting tired of this world and its people and its problems. So we're in Galatians. We're Apostle Paul. It is such a wild book. And what I love about this book is maybe it's just perfect for the moments we find ourselves in right now, is it's so many things. Like it's a very human book in many ways, is because Paul obviously started this church with very diverse groups of people. And it was really probably seems like one of the first churches where the Gentiles are really being included. And what happens is the division starts. And this is a normal thing in the beginning of the Christian church, is this division between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And kind of the old way and the new way and all this stuff. And you know what? Who knew that we would just continue to bicker for just 2,000 years and just continue to bite and devour one another as we do, unfortunately. I had a kind of a thought, and I think I'm going to do a little mini video on Instagram about this. But I think justification has a lot to do with why we argue so much. I watch like people always kind of justify their lifestyle and their lives by Christianity, and I think like, oh, well, I have, I'm a millionaire because Jesus, or I'm a vegan because Jesus said it was okay, or, Jesus was queer, or Jesus was this, or Jesus was that, and it's like, that's great. I get it. We want Jesus. One of the best things I ever saw was on the Give Me a Break, the Nell Carter show. And she takes the little kid, Joey. Remember? Yo. What did Joey say? Did he say, yo? Or something like that? And she took little Joey, because he was a little kid on that show. And Nell was like their housekeeper, nanny type of thing. And she takes him to her parents' house for some holiday or something. And he goes, Nell. And he sees a picture of Jesus. Goes, why is Jesus black in that photo? And she turns to Joey and she goes, honey, Kermit the Frog's house Jesus is green at Kermit the Frog's house. And I like that idea of just, often how we almost, identify, like we want we want to identify with Christ in so many ways. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to be honest with you. Of course, white Jesus has gotten a little out of control, but still, like, there's a reason why people kind of want Jesus to be in their image, or why Jesus relates to them. Now, Jesus was probably more black than he was white, definitely. But I like that concept of, that. But often we want to justify everything else we do, by like our diets or our finances or I think, and I think the problem is that we got to the point where we felt like we had to do that. And I think evangelicals really started making that happen. And you're often having to justify things that are very unbiblical, very not Christ, nothing Jesus said nothing about, And it becomes almost like a weird type of oh gosh, what is it? Like a weird type of apologetics or something, or a weird type of just trying to justify. And I'm just like, screw that. Like, listen, if you're wealthy, you know that Jesus wasn't wealthy. Jesus was poor. Jesus said, if you have this, give it to somebody else. Do this. Paul said the same thing. You don't have to justify it. Like, just be it. Just, help people. Love your neighbor. You do the best you can. But you don't have to justify and say, well, Jesus, the reason the Bible said, and so I think I can, you don't have to, like, find ways to justify stuff that's clearly not there. Not everything has to be Christian. All your bands don't have to be Christian bands. Not everything has to be justified through the Bible. I wish we would just live to learn life. Learn to live life on life's terms. And, if we allow conviction and following Christ to be part of our lives, there's points where we can say, yeah, some of these things are contradictions, but this is a part of me and this is who I am. And we can work it out without having to freaking like put God's seal of approval, a famous quote, it's been given to everybody and I don't know who it is, but like God made us in our image and then God made us in his own image and then we return the favor. It's just constantly just trying to justify things. And so anyway, I don't know why I went on that little justification tangent because I was going to do a video on it and still will probably. But I saw some like money financial Christian guy and I'm just always like, it's like, who put their chocolate in my peanut butter? Why we have to mix all these things together that just really shouldn't be mixed sometimes. It's like, I get it, you love Jesus, but you don't, I'm using Jesus to justify that shit. It's just not, doesn't really work. So, there's my tangent on, I think we liberals do it too, and we do it when we have our own purity culture and we could be just as hateful or just as weird about it and just like, my buddy who's like a hunter did this debate with somebody who was like a vegan and he was trying to like, Jesus was a vegan, and they're like, there's no, it's just like, Jesus was a punk rocker. It's like, well, anyway, I guess we all do it to try to feel better about ourselves and do that kind of stuff. But to me, I think allowing Jesus to live in some sort of neutral area for all of us and not having to justify all of our freaking choices, and being able to willing to be like, yeah, this probably isn't the most, biblical thing for me to be doing, but, I also don't live in 2,000-year-old Middle Eastern culture and figuring out how to do that. I guess it's that concept of like, Jesus is everything, he said everything, and I'm like, that can be possible without having to freaking turn Jesus into some weird justification thing. Like, grace is free. Live in that grace and see what happens. But it's also because we all argue all the time. So you shouldn't do that and you shouldn't do that. So then we all like grow to, Christians all go like, well, gee, it's like, anyhow. None of us are homeless and like letting, wealthy women put us up in houses and stuff like that, but just pretty much what Jesus did, and live, living on, most of us aren't doing, if we were like Jesus, it would be weird in some ways. And so there you go. There's my tangent. Back to Galatians. So what I love about Galatians is the pure humanity of the book and how it is this idea of Paul is writing to them to be like, you guys got to get along. But within that book, he's also trying to justify himself as an apostle and remind them like, hey, I'm pretty awesome. Hey, my call didn't just come from the other apostles who hung out with Jesus. Mine came from Jesus himself, showed himself to me. Okay, so we get all that. He's doing that. He's also telling them like, you guys are all being jerks. He's also rebuking them at the same time. So, and it's also probably the most solid book for understanding the message of grace. And so you have all these things happening in this small letter. There's like a lot of, it seems like contradictions, but they're not really contradictions. They all kind of work together. But I love that because life is messy. and Paul is dealing with a lot of messy stuff, and we live in this thing, and we often fear chaos. But one of the things I learned in dialectic behavioral therapy was, this thing called radical acceptance, and I've talked about it here before, where you just kind of have to, this is where I'm at. And so Paul is writing this letter of this is where and he's hoping for change, and he's warning them what's going to happen if there isn't change. And as we get further into it, you'll see that his biggest worry is not that like God's going to come down and strike them dead, or God's judgment, and any of that. His biggest worry is that you guys are going to destroy each other. And imagine that, divided people destroying each other, because we justify our idols and our politicians above our gods and above our grace and above love for one another. All right, here we go. So I'm not going to go through Galatians 1 and 2 and read you the whole thing. I'm just going to give you some highlights and kind of the setup here. So you get, here in Galatians in 1, you get Paul's normal, like, oh, greetings, hello, good to see you. I'm a Paul, I'm an apostle, says what he is. And he does kind of skip the niceties on this one from his normal books, but he really jumps into it right in 6. So if you're following along, Galatians 1:6, he really jumps into it, and he goes, "I am astonished." He gets right to business. "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ, and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some of you who are confusing you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ." And he goes on to say, even if angels do that, even if these things, even past, no, everyone's accursed who does that. So don't listen to angels if they try to tell you a different message. So Paul's saying, like, I've got the main message of Jesus here. He's like, I've got it. I've got the understanding of grace. If angels come down and tell you something different than I told you, they're wrong. He goes, now, I repeat, if anyone proclaims to you a gospel contrary to what you received, let that one be accursed. So, here's the thing is, what happens is you've got the group they're called Judaizers, of these Jewish Christian leaders who are coming in and saying, listen, you need to follow the law. You need to get circumcised to be a Christian. You need to, not eat certain animals sacrificed. You need to celebrate certain holidays. You need to do certain things in order to be a Christian and follow some of the laws of Judaism. And if you really want to experience Jesus, you have to go through this first to get to that. And Paul is saying that's rubbish. That's just not true. That the Gentiles don't need to have this same burden. That Jesus changed things, and that change was grace. And but I do like how he says, so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ. And I've thought about this, and I originally used to think like, oh, they're rejecting Jesus, but I think he's talking about himself. I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ. And I think that's what his message was to them, as he brought grace to them and said, you're free to be a community. You're free to live in a diverse world. You're free to even experience Christianity in a different way than your brothers and sisters are experiencing it. You're going to be, Gentile Christians aren't going to be carrying some of the same things that their Jewish Christian brothers have carried for so long as they have, accepted Jesus as the Messiah. They still have these things they want, traditions they want to celebrate, and things they've had to go through before Christ came, and now Christ is here. So this is going to be different. And if you know anything about people who have any type of faith, is they don't really like different often. They don't like diversity, and they don't like change. And so we often just create camps and get real binary about it and go, they're bad. No, they're bad. And it's usually good. We're good, and we're good. No, we're good. We're good. And it becomes this kind of really divided thing, and you get the kind of mess that you see today. And then we project it onto our freaking politics, which is just insane to me that we go like, this is God's politics. No, this is God's politics. Jesus would be a Democrat. No, Jesus would be a Republican. I'll tell you what, Jesus would not, it would not, and was not either. I'll go ahead and tell you that. Point blank. There's no way. Jesus said, love your enemies. Neither one of those groups are really good at loving their enemies and being kind to those who persecute them. So let's just go ahead and just stop thinking we follow Jesus's politics, because we don't. All right. And what I love about this part here is, so Paul's kind of saying, what have you done? You've gone crazy. You know, you're setting up tribes now, you know, because of this different message. But in 10, I love this. He goes, am I now seeking human approval in Galatians 1:10, or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And I'm going to tell you right now that that's it. See, pleasing people is what we talked about earlier, where people are trying to justify people, and you see these like, I'm a Christian influencer, and oh yeah, I do this, but let me tell you why God really hates those people. You know, that's just bullshit, okay? Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Bullshit! Sorry to use profanity today, but I'm a little bit over everybody claiming that Jesus is in their political party and on their side. It's getting a bit frustrating and a bit ridiculous, and it is keeping us divided and killing one another and treating one and taking each other's rights away and defending things that are kind of gross, or ignoring things that are kind of gross. And, you know, do you think Jesus would just ignore thousands and thousands of people being bombed, you know, that kind of thing, in order for another group to be happy and peaceful? You know, that just doesn't work. So we kind of, sometimes I think there's just certain things that if you want to live in this world and be in this world and stuff, there's certain things that you're just going to have to be like, well, I'm doing this, but I'm doing this because, you know, when you say the less of two evils, do you think Jesus was like, well, I'm just choosing the less of two evils? But the problem with the less of two evils is it's still evil. Okay. So we're going to just have to embrace contradiction in our lives. We're going to have to embrace that we're in a system that doesn't quite work that way and live in that. You know, or we're just going to have to become like little monks and hide and not do anything and just hide in our little, you know, create little towns that, you know, no one comes into. You know, this is it. You have to embrace contradiction in this world. You have to, that's part of it, you know, and you have to do the best to follow your convictions and your truth, but it's not always easy. But I just would ask people to stop trying to use freaking Christianity to justify horrible things. Or even good things, you know, like, okay, you want to have money and be happy. Okay, great. I get it. You're a human being, but you don't have to freaking, you know, use a scripture that's about forgiveness. You know, my barn's running over, because it's how you forgive, you'll be forgiven. Barn's running over. You don't have to use that to pretend like that's why Jesus wants you to be rich. So he goes, am I now seeking human approval or God's approval? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And that's so true, because people get so angry. If you really follow Jesus, and that's here where you go, this is why people want to use it justify, because they don't want to really follow that kind of like pure, like inclusive, loving grace, loving your enemies, being good, feeding the poor. They don't like it. The Beatitudes make everybody uncomfortable. I mean, even my most liberal friends often skip the last parts of the Beatitudes of loving your enemies and being kind to them and praying for them. Often some of you on here go like, oh, Jay, but that's triggering and I don't like that and that's not safe. And how could you tell me to do that? I'm like, I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm reading what's in here. I'm saying that these are the recommendations. I'd also tell you, go find a good therapist. This might not happen overnight. You know, but I'm just saying this is what's in here. So that's why he's saying I'm not trying to be a people pleaser. If I was still trying to please people, I would not follow Christ. You know, I'm called to love and pray for Donald Trump. I don't necessarily like the guy. I don't like what he's doing. I don't like what Elon Musk is doing. I don't like that. And some of my friends here are conservatives. And I'll be honest, that's just where I'm at. But it doesn't mean I hate the man. I don't like what he's doing, but I love him and I want to see him change. I want to see him find more love and grace. It's not easy. It wasn't easy for me to forgive Jerry Falwell. That wasn't easy. But also when I speak up on behalf of my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, you know, some people say, "Oh, he's just tickling ears." I'm like, I'm not tickling ears. The church revolution's never been the same since we took those stands. It's not about tickling ears. It's about following convictions. And sometimes that's not going to win you popularity contests when you follow that type of love, that type of grace, and that type of compassion. When you go like, hey, the only way to work this problem out is if we all work together, if we come together as a community, and if we stop fighting. And that's not a popular thing. That's why I love peacemakers. That's why I like Martin Luther King. Oh, and I got my little John Hume picture here, and another little John Hume thing up here. I didn't get the big picture, but why I love these guys is because they knew that within this concept of nonviolence and these type of things that we had to bring divided people together, because if we stayed divided, nothing was going to change, and we had to work together. There he is, John Hume. He's at the tip of my red pen. See? It's a little wood burning of him, and there's a free dairy snow globe right next to it. So Paul's coming in going like, because one of the things that happens is when Paul was preaching grace and inclusion, believe it or not, people got angry. And why did they get angry? Not because they were getting grace and inclusion, but because other people were getting grace and inclusion. That the people that they disagreed with were getting grace and inclusion as well, and they did not like that. Just like when John Hume said we all have to work together and start a meeting with everybody on both sides, his house got firebombed by his own people. Just why Martin Luther King was the most unpopular amongst whites and blacks when he was killed, because they said, oh, he's including too many people. The Poor People's Campaign, speaking out against Vietnam, he's lost his vision. He's not focused on this anymore. So yes, that's what happens when inclusion comes about, is you often fall out of popularity when you speak hard truths. And that's what the Apostle Paul is doing here. I think we can skip the rest of it. He just kind of talks about how he came in, what God did in his life, that basically like he got called by God. And he says, it was really crazy because he persecuted Christians. He didn't like Christians. And some say violently, and some say just like with his words. It just depends on how accurate you believe the book of Acts is. But one of the things he goes is, I was still unknown by sight to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. The only heard, they said, the one who formerly was persecuting us now is proclaiming the very faith he once tried to destroy. So that's interesting. So even this guy's got a story of grace and bringing in grace, This is our recap, catch up, Galatians, part 4, but this is just previously on on Revolution podcast. I'm gonna, there's a point where he's got other people are spying on him to see if he's doing the right thing, what's going on, all this stuff. We're gonna pass by that, and I'll talk to this one point here. This new thing that was happening within the church. And when he's talking to Peter, and he goes, when the gospel for the uncircumcised, I had been entrusted with the gospel of the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised. And he's basically just saying, like, this is the new thing. Like, this is the new, I went and met with the apostles, and they agreed with me that this inclusion of Gentiles was the correct thing to do. And he also goes on to say, but what they really said didn't matter to me because God has no respecter of favorites. So Paul's kind of a character here. But he said, they recognized the grace that had been given to him. But then he goes into telling a story about, and this is really interesting, is he goes in to tell this story in part 2, all after he's already said, like, they gave me the right hand of fellowship. They agreed with me, and I went on to do my work. And this is that kind of this is this kind of thing that happens often. And so he got this like thumbs up from these guys. But then he moves into this doing the work. And he goes, in 11, he goes, but when Cephas came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face. He's talking about Peter, the very person he just got the okay to do all this stuff for. I'm like, go, you get him. I'm going to handle the circumcised. You handle the uncircumcised. James, we're all here. We got your back. And all of a sudden, all these same guys who's giving him the thumbs up, he has an issue with. Right? I mean, it's funny. He goes from here to like, oh, they all agreed. I've got the thumbs up. Boom, here we go. To what I had to rebuke Peter. Because he stood self-condemned. For until certain people came from James's, so he got the thumbs up from James. So he's saying James's people came, who recently gave me the thumbs up, came and made Peter feel self-conscious about hanging out with Gentiles, about hanging out with the wrong folks. All of a sudden he felt insecure about what he had felt secure about. So this is pure humanity. These are human people doing very human things. This is one other reason I really like this book. So he's still self-condemned. For until certain people came from James's, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. So he's basically saying, like, these are the people that were... James obviously was also called to the circumcised. All they came in, he's like, well, now they come in, now James is afraid of what people are... I mean, now Peter, like the head of the church, is worried about what these folks are going to think about him. It could have been a financial thing. It could have been a respect thing. It could have been a religious thing. It could have been a traditional thing. All those things that creep in and make us feel guilty and make us feel unworthy. And the other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray. Now, Barnabas is the Apostle Paul's like buddy, like best friend, like travel partner and assistant. I don't know. They travel together, they do ministry together. Even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, the inclusive truth, the grace that brought, Jews and Gentiles together, that, there's neither male nor female, no Jew nor Gentile, no longer exist. We're all one. He goes, but I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, which is inclusion from both sides. Remember, inclusion means, we want to be included, but then we don't want to include. That becomes hypocrisy. Remember that. Even when there are people we disagree with, we want them to include us even though they disagree with us, but then we don't want to include them unless they agree with us, is hypocrisy. I said to Cephas before them all, if you, through a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? So how can you be inclusive, but then compel other people not to be? How can you say, well, I love everybody, we're really, how can you do this? How can you lead them astray? And he goes into the little speech he gave, and I think it's important to hear, and I think you could use different terms instead of Jews and Gentiles in here quite easily. And the reason why I think Galatians is a timeless letter for us all. We ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. Hey, hold on. You call them Gentile sinners. Yet you know that a person is justified not by the work of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. And we have come to believe in Christ Jesus so that we might be justified by faith in Christ, and not by doing the works of the law, because no one will be justified by the works of the law. But if in our effort to be justified in Christ ourselves we have been found to be sinners, is Christ the servant of sin? Certainly not. But I build up again the very thing that I once tore down, then I demonstrate that I am a transgressor. And so what he's saying is the transgression here is rebuilding the old law. And see, this is what happens. This is often why people just feel the need to be justifying everything they do, is because we all rebuild a new law. We all have our own purity culture, like I said. Like the left has their own purity culture of the things that you've got to say and think and believe if you want to be considered their side, and the right has the same thing. And so what he's saying is when we do these things that exclude one another continuously and stand on these like towers of self-righteous and judgment, he's saying we're rebuilding a system. You're creating a new law. Obviously, this law was no longer in existence, but he's saying you're recreating the very thing that we tore down. We just put in new rules and regulations. We just create new ideas, and we just use this faith as a system to control people or tell them how they have to think or not think. And it's really easy when you're playing with God to become real judgmental and real self-righteous because you're going, well, God's on my side, you know. And that's just not how it works, folks. That's just, you know, if you want to play that kind of stuff, you really shouldn't do it with religion. If you look at the history of it, has it ever really helped? I mean, it usually leads to murder and killing and destroying people's lives. And, you know, for me, when I was growing up, when my parents had their really big scandal and all that stuff, it was both sides, you know. I mean, the left was already kind of made fun of my parents, and the right just was like willing to let them go. And everybody just kind of laughed and pointed. Not a lot of people showed up. You know, a lot of people more enjoyed the dancing on the graves. That's why I don't like people dancing on the graves of the fallen, even when they're evangelicals or even when they're concerned. You know, I'm like, well, how do we restore? What do we do? How do we bring repentance into this? And when I mean repentance, I don't mean like, how do we ask them to forgive? I mean, I'm asking like, how do we heal? How do we restore? How do we help them see the truth? How do we feel? If we show grace and they see the grace, maybe they'll move on to preach grace. You know, maybe this is a restoration moment of grace and compassion and hope. But that's not usually how life works, right? So let's not, you know, then I demonstrate that I'm a transgressor when I rebuild old laws or I think create new ones. That's the thing. Grace is not people pleasing. When I say grace is anarchy, I can tell you there's so many people want to put an asterisk by it. You know, we get so full of anger and hate, you know, which is human nature. It's human nature to be like, this person's evil, I can't stand it, you know, and that's what religion, that's what Christianity is calling us to say, okay, well, I want you to die to that. We need justice. Now, I'm not saying grace without justice. Justice, we need to create justice, but we need to have justice and create justice without hate. Because if we have hate in there, it's going to be a little bit toxic, and it's going to be a little bit hurtful, and it might not restore, and it might not leave an open door for change or for restoration. You know. And people, I've seen like a lot of progressive Christians go, oh, those pastors, they fall and then they just come back and do the same thing. I just can't stand it, you know, and that's why I don't like restoration. And I'm going like, no, that's not restoration. That's them just trying to survive. If there was a restoration process, we would come in and say, we want to help you, and let's look at this and look what happened. Often either those people are pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, or they're only people that help lift them up are people in their own tribe or people who are as conservative or angry as that. Sometimes that happens. Like my dad was more liberal, but then when he got out of prison, the only person who gave him a house to live and a car to drive was Franklin Graham. Franklin Graham showed up and said, hey, I remember you helped me build a hospital back in the 80s. Hey, here's a house, here's a car, you know. So the Lutherans weren't there saying like, hey, we love everybody. Come on, Jim, we want to help you. No, nope, that's okay. And that's kind of what happens. So often that happens. People don't understand the importance of restoration. It's often a two-way street. It's so easy to be judgmental. It's so easy to write people off, or it's so easy to say like, well, there's nothing I can do, Jay. I'm just this person. We can write letters. We can talk to people. I mean, I had a friend who was recently canceled. I just was recently canceled from an event, and I called the denomination. I called the head of the denomination. It was a big denomination. I left a message. Finally, somebody got back to me, and I had a very like Paul the Apostle moment of saying like, what you're doing is wrong because you know that the reason you're canceling isn't true, but you're still doing it because of rumors. You know, what kind of precedents do we set? So there are things you can do. You can pick up a phone. You can go somewhere and look like a jackass and hope that maybe some truth and mercy and grace get through it. You could even say, if I'm a part of a church and you see some, hey, is there anything we could do to help this person? Sometimes you'll know where your leadership stands and where your denomination is. Often they're just so caught up in their own world that they just don't think that that kind of stuff matters anymore. And it's particularly very sad to me. Or they just really don't. It's just uncomfortable, and they don't want to do uncomfortable work, and it could make them look bad, and they're worried about their reputation and their fundraising and things like that. I mean, that's just the reality of what happens in this work too often. And we'll end here. We can all go on our way, our lovely way. But he goes, if I rebuild the old system, I demonstrate that I'm a transgressor. For though the law I died to the law, crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Imagine, and that's, it seems like such a weird thing to say, but there's often times where it's like, well, if I'm really going to say that I love my enemy, it might have to be Christ within me making that happen. I'm going to have to say, this is me dying to my flesh. This is me making an effort not to hate. Now, I don't like what they do. And remember, Martin Luther King said, thank goodness Jesus said, love his enemies and not like my enemies. Because Dr. King said, I can't love somebody who firebombs my house. I can't like someone who firebombs my house. I can't like that someone wants to lynch my loved ones. But I can love them and hope that they stop doing that, and that they are led to some sort of repentance, that they are led to a change that keeps them from doing that. I can love that and hope for that. It's tough stuff, folks. So I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, I really like this, and I'm not a big atonement theory guy, but I really like the way that Paul uses this, and I believe Paul was a very atonement-believing person. He goes, I do not nullify the grace of God, for if justification comes through the law, through works, through repetitive things, through following what the Christians, what Jewish tradition, or what the new laws that we create, if salvation comes through that, which I was really led to believe almost my whole life, my early life in Christian churches, and it came from being good, and not really from faith, but just trusting that what the pastor said was right and not questioning that. Sometimes I think the church doesn't even understand what faith is. Maybe we'll do some. There is a really great book by Paul Tillich, and what's it called? It's about faith. And anyway, maybe we can do a study on that or do a talk. I'll do a talk on it because it's really trying to dissect faith and really looks at it. What the kids would probably call deconstruction nowadays. But this was probably written in the 50s. But it's The Dynamics of Faith is the book. Dynamics of Faith. So maybe we'll take a look at that. But he goes, I do not nullify the grace of God, for if justification comes through the law, then Christ died for nothing. And what I like in the New Living, it said, then Christ died in vain. And I've often thought about, like in my early years when I was so filled with guilt and thought the church hated me and that God hated me and all this stuff. And my friend, D.E. Polk, who runs a church in Georgia, in Atlanta, he said to me, he's like, Jay, you're making Christ's death in vain. I mean, he literally said those words. And he goes, because you're trying to earn your salvation, you're trying to do good things, you think it's this willy-nilly thing that God's love for you depends on what you're doing or what you're not doing and all these little things, and you're just saying like, well, you're making grace in vain. You're saying you don't need grace, or that grace isn't good enough for you, it doesn't work for you, and that you're somehow, he's like, it's just bullshit. Sorry I've been so frank today with my language, but I'm tired. I'm tired just like you all are in this freaking time change. Daylight saving time stinks, and the world is in a really crappy place, and I've got personal things and loved ones that are going through hell right now, so I'm a bit tired from this stuff. But that's where we're at with Galatians. He ends with that. So you can see why I love this letter. It's a very powerful letter. He's like, if you go around thinking you can do all this stuff, and that's where that justification one comes in again. When we're doing all that justification, what we're trying to do is saying, grace isn't sufficient to cover my want to have 3 houses and 5 cars. It's like, listen, just don't try to support that with the Jesus Bible. You know what I mean? We're justified by grace. That's it. So there you go. Oh, it just says message retracted. That's weird. But justification comes from grace. Nothing else. It's not about that. Sometimes you're just going to have to embrace the contradictions that you live in. And sometimes we're going to have to realize that some of those people that are live ways that maybe we don't think are great might have a way of loving people more or doing more for people than we've ever imagined. We just don't know. And that's the thing, is we just make these judgments we make judgments on the way that we don't want to be judged. Like, I don't want you to judge on my lifestyle. I don't want you to judge on what my identity I have. And then we see somebody else's lifestyle and somebody else's identity, and we judge it. And I think that's why the right and left thing is just crap, because we just keep going around. Like, I feel like my life, I've just watched my friends on the left just do exactly what the conservatives did before. And I wonder if this is just a cycle that continues to run through itself. It's like liberal Christians and conservative Christians just continue to point fingers at each other. And it's just like, just what point are we just going to go, okay, all right, you're welcome to your opinion, but I'm going to love you from now on. And yes, I'm going to speak truth to you, but maybe we'll work on things like not making bills out of our convictions and passing laws on our convictions. I mean, maybe those are the things we can argue about, and say the rest of it, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't affect me and you want to be a judgmental guy and do those things, go do those things. This is America. It's a free country. You have the right to say those. Go do those things. I think the things we need to focus on is it affecting other people? Is it hurting other people? And that type of thing. And so that we don't become, was it Nietzsche that said, those who fight monsters must be very careful not to become monsters themselves. And I know I beat this like a dead horse, but you know what? I have to. Because no matter how much I talk about it, it'll probably never end. But if we take this together as a revolution community, we take this and take it into our, because you guys are spread out everywhere. There's some of you who listen in London. There's some of you who listen in Belfast. There's some of you who listen in Ohio. Some of you who listen in California. Some of you listen in Tennessee and Memphis and Arizona. And we're all over the place. So we just kind of try to practice this stuff, kind of older thing, or maybe bring it up to somebody. Next time you're at your family's thing and some crazy thing comes up, you go, you know what? Maybe could we just talk about the things that I think are affecting other people? If you want to do the rest of the stuff, that's not the problem. The problem is just, taking other people's liberties and freedoms away, And we got to love everybody as ourselves. So there you go. Love you guys. Thanks so much. Hey, listen, we dearly do depend on your donations. It's the only way Revolution survives is through nonprofit. We're a nonprofit, 501c3. And you can go to revolutionchurch.com. We have a Venmo and we have PayPal, and it's all tax deductible. As long as we're allowed to be a church, we're a religious nonprofit, we'll do it. But yeah, we could use your support. We really could. I got half a paycheck this week. Luckily, I have a painting job coming up tomorrow for the next few days, but it's still barely enough for me to do this. I'm often work 2, maybe 3 jobs if I can. And but we Revolution, I would love to do this full time again. This is 30 years of Revolution. And so if you like this work, you believe in this work, and don't donate what you don't have, obviously. We don't want that. But if you have extra, if there's something you can help, if you want to really help this work become more and better and just actually help me survive and doing this work and giving me the time to do these studies and things, you can support us at those places. So thank you all so much. Love you all very much. Stay strong. Love each other. Give yourself grace as well through this time. I have to be I always remind people to give themselves grace, and then I forget to do it for myself. Give yourself some grace. Take some rest. Last night I ate a big bowl of macaroni and cheese, and I, probably going to gain a few pounds, and that's okay, because I just needed some comfort food. I needed to rest. I needed to relax. I needed to re-engage, or disengage, from things, and that's what I did. So take care of yourself. Love each other. Be kind. Remember, we're all going through this together. We're all kind of scatterbrained right now. And but I do believe we can make a great change. I do think we can get together and we can make change for this world and make this world a better place. But we really have to learn how to do it in a really productive way that's just not going to continue to keep us in this cycle of destroying each other's lives. We got to make a place. We all got to get together and do it together. We got to make a bigger table and speak truth to authority. Thank you all. Love you all. Much grace. Bye-bye.